This is a course to introduce you to the giant topic of AI, but really also to think about your role as a parent, what it is you actually need to know, how it is you could possibly keep up with the rapid advancement, and what it is to equip your child not only to be safe in a world that's saturated with technology, but also to really continue to grow and develop and be skilled. So, what I'm going to do is have this course first grounded in some learning science. And this is not a delay tactic or a way to not get to the tech, but this is actually the basis for why paying attention to what your child or teen is exposed to, how they are learning, and when they are not, is your power as a parent. So you can start this within your own home and also continue it within conversations with your child's school. So if you have a child really of any age, whether it's been on the road trip or in the car, coming home from the school day, or a subject that they face that is not their favorite, you might have heard them say, boring, or this so boring. And that signals to two possible paths that a learner is going down. Number one is overwhelm. Boring can be a defense mechanism that something feels like too big of a stretch and it's a shutdown. But oftentimes it's just that the desire to have stimulation and input and kind of to be led into the next step is there. And the brain hasn't been activated to come up with a curious problem to solve or a new way to do it, or a desire of why this learning how to conjugate the Spanish verbs is important to me, or why reading this paragraph from my English novel that was sent home or the textbook is of value. When boring comes up, what happens next is really important, because what happens next has to do with how active or passive your child is. When this happens at home and your response is that they can hop on the iPad or their phone or device, many times, not all, but many times that's letting them turn to a passive mode, meaning whatever the program is on the computer, whatever the video game is, whatever the feed of watching videos, even ones that you've closely curated and monitored, even watching an educational TV show, it is all passive because they get to sit and the connections have been made for them. The where the storyline is going to go has already been scripted out. When our brains are active, neurons are firing. So this graphic here is some liberties are taken with it, but the idea is the same, right? That within the brain, the way we learn information is a very active process. Those neurons that fire together, wire together. This is from Donald Hebb, a famous neuroscientist from last century, who really helped shape a lot of our understanding and thinking about how it is that we as humans work. And the neural networks, the connections that our brains make when we take in new information, have to work with it, practice it, and restore it, are what makes learning stick. So being around information is not the same as learning. Take a school day of your child. Take a school day of yourself. A lot of people end up in situations where they are sitting and someone is talking at them and they are just receiving, they're around information. But when you're not given even the simplest task, like take a moment and think of a classroom yourself. So even right now, when I ask you to do that, I'm asking you, instead of just receiving, to stop, engage your brain, and come up with a situation. It could be last week in your child's school, and maybe you got to visit a class presentation. Maybe they told you about a class that they loved or a class that they were dreading. Maybe it's your own schooling and you're thinking back to that 7th grade history teacher that just talked and talked and talked and got really mad if anyone looked at the other direction. You're thinking of something, and so your brain is active. Now what I want you to do is I want you to think about something that you've most recently had to repeat. So it could be learning a new recipe. Maybe for a holiday, you were trying a new recipe, making a pie crust, And if it's one of the first times you've done it, maybe you had to make the pie crust a couple times before it came out. If it's the 30th time you've done it, maybe it was a lot easier. This is because you've rehearsed, you've built the neural circuits and you've been able to do it. You can think about something your child has taken on. I have a friend whose daughter recently got her driver's license. And so the rehearsal of how to drive the car, how to take in all the factors of cars on the roads and nighttime and rain and needing to park, these are all ways that there was active learning and neural circuits are connected through effort and repetition. And here's an example when learning isn't happening. When your child's in a classroom and they're given a worksheet to complete and they have to turn it in. Because if they have found a way, back to the boring slide, to make that task really important and meaningful to them, then they're going to engage and they're going to work through the sheet. But if they're just doing it to turn it in and keep a grade, or that's not even a hook, they're just going through the motions. They're exposed to information, they're around information, but they're not doing the experiential active work to actually learn. And that's what we want to really tend to. So take a minute and think, how much of your child's day is more about being around information? This is a pretty typical state of schools, meaning there's a lot of learning that is out of a textbook or out of a worksheet, and kids are around it, but they're not as much immersed in having to grapple with the problem or apply this to a real life situation or work across different choice groups where they have decided a topic or a way that they want to complete the task. It's just not the normal status quo design of school. And so a lot of your child's day is being around information. A teacher is going over a PowerPoint. They're lecturing them. I want you to think about what that's like for your child outside of school. Now, if they're involved in a lot of extracurriculars, whether it's a sculpture class or lacrosse team, they're actively in those settings and in the process of building and making their learning techniques and moves. They're using their body, their hands, it's sensory. So that's more than being around information. There's an active learning happening in that situation. But when they're out of school, we often default to having them just be around information too. Let's say there's a great influencer on YouTube who's doing a lot with 3D printing or building. They can be excellent STEAM videos that are really engaging and compelling to watch what happens. There's a story told, they're well produced. But in the end, your child is still just around that information. They're watching it. If they watch it 5 or 10 times, maybe it sticks in their mind and they want to go do it on their own. And maybe they have access to a 3D printer and so they can practice those things. But a lot of the content that our kids, ourselves as adults, take in isn't active. It's meant to get our attention, and we are there passively receiving. So we can't really call that learning time, even though it was a video on a topic your child's really interested in. If they're watching about Mars rover and then doing something to apply that information and quiz themselves or make their own model or design an interview question for a scientist that they get to meet that has to do with something about designing a rover or life on Mars, then they've turned it into active. But just exposure to it is not going to be that. And learning does not mean the finished project. So if your child has finished a poster board or an essay they've submitted, that doesn't prove that they've learned it. This is the point of interaction that you want to work with them on. The process before that finished product is what's most important. So learning is everything that happens around the exposure and on the journey to the finished product, but it's not just the exposure and it's not just the end point. And plenty of kids, probably yourself as an adult, have turned in finished projects that they didn't actually learn the information for. And you can see this when kids get up to talk about it, when it's the 3 to 5 minute talk they give to the class, and someone asks a pretty basic question. And if it wasn't in the part they just rehearsed from what's presented, they don't have that information in their mind to build and work on. And when we think about technology, this is really critical because it's that building of knowledge in their mind that is going to set them up now, whether they're 5, 12, 18, and on into the future. Because this is essentially how learning processes work. It's the learning loop. We start at the top with attempting something. This is, we try. I want to learn a new skill. I want to learn to ride a bike. I want to learn to roller skate. I want to learn to code on the computer. I want to learn to do better at Minecraft. You begin with the effort and you attempt the task. And in that attempt is where the learning loop starts. Now, the next thing that happens is feedback. Feedback can just be an emotional feedback, like I was embarrassed or that hurt, right? That's the feedback of a young child reaching up towards a stove and feeling the heat or having a burn. And so in the future, the feedback was, I don't do that. That hurt me. This is feedback of going in to get a shot and having fear around that when kids go to get their annual vaccines because there's some feedback. That stung, it hurt. I remember that. But feedback can also be really positive. It can be somebody saying, I love your drawing. And so then the next part is you adjust. I love your drawing, but I'm wondering what's going to go behind the figure you've started here. I love what you've wrote. This story is so interesting. I got a little confused at the opening sentences. You are great on the soccer field. It's amazing how you dribble and are able to pass with such efficiency, right? Feedback comes in so many different forms. It comes physically, it comes through words, it's positive, it's negative, it's a whole host of things in between. And then what we do is we adjust based on that feedback. I like that feedback, so I'm going to use what they said and do more of it. I'm going to go faster. I'm going to go slower. I'm going to ignore the feedback. I didn't like that person. That made me feel angry or self-conscious. I'm going to do something different. So one way or another, the person who started attempting learning something makes an adjustment. And then they practice and rehearse, right? This is the thing we all know. If you have to give a speech in your work, if you practice it and rehearse it, it will go much better than if you kind of outline something and show up the next day. If you have a part in a play, you have to practice and rehearse the lines. If you are learning a new mathematical formula, it's not enough to just have the formula available. This is part of the reason why teachers give practice problems, why you might have 20 problems on the concept, because you'll need to practice and rehearse, right? And if you need to get more feedback and adjust, right, that happens. You practice, rehearse, the teacher looks at it, your parent looks at it, they tell you which ones are right, which are wrong, and you go back and adjust. And then retrieval is the last part. So that's when you've really learned something. That means it's in your mind. And when you need to know it 6 hours from now, 6 days from now, 6 months from now, you can reliably get that information back. A really great example of this is learning a new language, and especially learning a new language when you start in, say, middle school, high school, or adult, because we're more aware of what's happening. If you're learning a new language for a long time, it feels like a lot of effort to just put a few words together. Definitely when you hear someone who fluently speaks that language, it feels overwhelming. I got a few words, but I can't follow the whole sentence. But as you persist and practice and get feedback, you rehearse. As you file away the vocabulary words that you know, you're filing them in places in your brain where it's logical connections. These are all colors. I'm going to add one on my color list. These are all cities. I'm going to add that to that. These are all verbs, right? And we have this really intricate filing system in our brains. Think about your Google Drive. The very first time you thought Google Drive, there was nothing in it. It was empty. You decided to organize the folders. You gave them titles. There were categories that made sense to you. And as you added things in them, if you put things in the right folder, when you needed to go back and find it, it was there. However, if you didn't put it in the right folder, or you gave it some highly unusual name, as that Google Drive folder grew, it became almost impossible to find the document. Unless, of course, you have all the great search features that Google does have. And so this is the same thing that's essentially how our brains are work. We can rehearse, and we want to file it in the right place. Here's a way this helps illustrate this is that, let's say a student's learning all the capitals of the 50 states, and they're memorizing all that, and they get to California, and the capital starts with an S, and they practice all the 50 states. They get to California, they say San Francisco, because that starts with an S. They've heard the name of that city a lot. So they file it in their brain under state capitals, California. That's what they file away. Well, when they go to retrieve it, that's the information they'll have, even though that's not correct. The correct answer is Sacramento. But maybe the student has never been to Sacramento or just made a simple mistake. And then they get the feedback that they were in the classroom and they gave the answer San Francisco and that was wrong. So they adjust their learning. They rehearse, okay, it's Sacramento, and they file the new information. This is what's happening all the time. Sometimes we're really conscious when we're studying for a test or something high stakes, but most of the time we're just trying things, experiencing them, getting some feedback, adjusting from that feedback, rehearsing, and filing it away. So back to that opening where we talked about the idea of being bored, this is what we activate in brains all the time. You do it with your toddlers, you want to do it with your elementary, middle, and high school students, and you want to do it with yourself.